Everyone, Leanne Bridges and Sharon Cohen here. Our passion formed together something called the Magical Soul Venture 4 years ago. And really what was designed to do is offer a variety of retreats and workshops, as well as virtual and live programs and events to support women as they adventure through the enlightening process of healing and self-discovery. And part of this process is we have this YouTube series, Magical Soul Adventure Conversations. And so we're going to start today. We're going to talk about a couple of different things. Our last couple of women's circles that we hosted, one was on living life by accepting death and getting over the fear of death. And also the discussion around self-care versus selfishness. And you'd be surprised, they seem like very different topics, but they actually all intertwine. So I just want to first introduce myself. I'm Leanne Bridges, and I'm an author and speaker and a human potential catalyst, really help people in their individual lives, their careers and their work, professional lives, to help them really achieve their potential, reach greater levels of awareness and leadership so that they can perform and live their best life, express their greatest purpose and passion. And Sharon, over to you.
Hi. So I'm Sharon Cohen. I'm a holistic naturopath, and for the last over 25 years. And I really, really love to support women to feel well in their body, to balance their hormones, to have optimum digestion, to have energy, to live the life that they love, whatever that shall be. So I support that in my work, in my play, in my joy of being on this earth and being alive.
Excellent. That's great. So it's fun, these conversations. Yesterday and 2 weeks ago we start with a topic and we go into lots of different directions. And what we try to do here is pull back some of the nuggets, but then we end up in different directions too. And whatever comes through for this conversation is really, we believe is for ourselves and for whoever's listening, is just absolutely perfect. And so let's start with maybe the idea of our fear of death. And there's so many philosophers in the past have said, when we fear death, we don't live fully. That constant fear of death of ourselves or of a loved one keeps us in perpetual limitation, because we won't do this because this will happen, and eventually maybe the ultimate death will happen. And so if we start to observe that, in the West in particular, death is seen, talking about it is taboo a lot of times. Even just when we posted the topic of that women's circle a couple of weeks ago, some people said to us, I'm not sure if I want to go. I don't want to talk about death. But how do we not talk about something that affects all of us? And it doesn't just affect us because we die, but each one of us will lose someone very close to us in our lifetime. So whether it's a close friend, a parent, a grandparent, a spouse, a child, a sibling, at some point we're going to have experience with loss and deep loss. And so by just ignoring it, putting our head in the sand, are we really dealing with it and accepting it? And by hiding from it, are we suppressing it and not living our full potential as a result of that? So want to talk a little bit about that and why we do that. Why do we kind of, not talk about it as if it'll go away? And it relates to that, a lot of the fear within. And where does the fear come from? Well, I think there's a few different areas, and you can jump in at any time, Sharon, but our natural body, right, is designed not to die. If it wasn't, we wouldn't be lasting for years. So there is that whole system that kicks in, the fight or flight when there is danger. And maybe we can talk a little bit about that after, but that's the natural one. But we're kind of living, and again, Sharon, you've mentioned a lot how we're living in the perpetual anxiety and fear that are not necessarily real ones that are in our environment that might kill us in the next moment, a car or whatever. But that the fear of what could happen. I might lose my job. There's fear. I might lose my son or my daughter because they might run out in the street, or they're not home at night, or whatever, that constant fear. And so that constant fear keeps us in that limitation. But there's also, so do you want to say anything about that, or do you want me to continue?
I guess that I'll just add something here that where do these fears come from? So we are a soul that's manifest here on earth at a particular time and space. And within that, and nobody else has manifest here in that exact time and space. And that brings, makes us a unique being on this planet. And so we already come in with our uniqueness. And then we are have the influence of our parents. And then we have the influence of our schools and our friends. And so all of that together, and maybe our religious institutions. And so all of that together has made us have these ideas in our mind, right? And have these beliefs. So that's what I just wanted to say, that this is where all the beliefs come from that bring us to this place of, who am I, or what are my triggers around death? And we're very conditioned about that in a culture that, like you said, Leanne, we're not talked, it's not talked about, or it wasn't in my, family situation. So it's something that was a lot about the unknown until something happened,
Yes.
until somebody died. And then I think each family deals with it in a different way, given how they were conditioned and what they were taught and all that. So I just wanted to
Yeah,
bring
that's so good. And I think about like kind of thinking about my own family. My father was diagnosed with cancer and started treatment before any of the kids even learned about it. He was in treatment because my parents were particularly my mom was so closed about anything like that. And he was on, had basically 2 weeks to live. He was on his deathbed. And my mom still didn't want to talk about the idea that he could pass or anything about his affairs or anything. He couldn't talk about it until after he actually died. And
Mm,
so what that caused was such like this kind of not being able to express yourself, not being able to wonder and so forth. But that did change after we talked. Well, when you're faced with it, you have to. And it was for my mom, and this happened to me is also with my husband who died a couple of years later. It was really the first time where she really questioned what exists after death. She was brought up Catholic and said, well, I believe there's God, but I don't believe there's anything after. And I said, well, why do you believe in God? Well, because I'm afraid not to. That's what I was taught by the nuns. If I don't believe in God, I'll go to hell, but you don't believe in the afterlife. But, so the fear is not logical, but it's been ingrained, just like you said, from the religions. And it was
beautiful.
only after that she started wanting to, and this is what a lot of people realize, that when you lose someone really close to you, it's the first time that you really want to connect with the other side to kind of see, is there anything else? And she explored through some help, myself and other people, how does my husband still exist? She was asking. If so, how can I connect with him? And she learned to be able to do it a little bit more, maybe through other people and mediums and stuff, but was open to it. And it made her life so much more peaceful. She was in absolute suffering and pain as he was dying and when he died. And you wanted to say something about that? Sorry.
I don't remember
Okay. I was
what
just
I,
talking about
so
what my mom learned from the Catholic Church, when you were saying that, and how she just, was just believed that you have to fear God. And if you don't believe something bad is going to happen to you. But and that's the thing, because so there's the fear of the end of life. So I'm going to lose my partner or loved one, or I'm going to lose my life. And so that's the belief that we're not eternal. So as you're saying before, we are an energy soul being coming down into the space and time to express
yes,
this. And we do it again and again at different times and spaces and different multi-dimensions and universes, and who knows, maybe other planets. And so if we actually knew that, we wouldn't have as much fear that this is just a transition from one to the other. And same with the ones we lose, that we can connect with them, and that we can also reconnect with them in physicality at other points in our existence.
yes, yes, yes. I do remember now you were talking about, and it's not logical, you said.
Mhm.
And that really stuck out for me,
Mhm.
really stuck out, because most of what we fear
Mhm.
is not logical.
Yes.
Most of the what ifs that we have, right, don't make sense, and
Mhm.
they're not real. It's an illusion, right? And so
So
I've told, yes, so I've told this story before, that when my son got his license, he said, I'm going to my friends, I'll be home at 9. And then it was 9 and I was like, okay, he's not home. Okay, I'll wait. And then it was 9:30 and I tried his phone and he didn't answer. And then the what if started. But they were based on 2 weeks before we heard of a young boy who was traveling to the Laurentians and his car turned over. And by the time they found him, they brought him to the hospital and he died. So that was in my psyche. And so as it got later and later, where do you think my mind went? Oh my God, his phone is turned off. Oh my God, I can't reach him. Oh my God, what if something happened to him? Oh my God, what if he died? And that's what we do. And already I'm going from, oh my gosh, he's a half an hour, 45 minutes late, to he's dead.
Mhm.
In
Mhm.
30 seconds, my mind went there because of the programming, because of what I had taken in before, right? Had nothing. So, anyway,
No,
just to
that's a really
say,
good example. And how what you just explained, we do all the time. And maybe we don't go right to death, but we go to fear, fear, fear. And underneath that, let's say, you might be sitting there one day and thinking about, my boss said this to me, and oh my God, da da da. You're almost thinking, you may not be quite there, I might lose my job. So I might lose my job. Why are you so fearful of losing your job? Because you might not have the money. And then if you don't have the money, what happens in the house? And you don't have a house, what happens? It all rates back to
to the
really
back,
the
you're a
existential
bad
fear.
lady because you're,
Exactly. And you can't survive.
that's what,
We have such survival fear at a stage in our lives, a stage of our society and history, where we really shouldn't. And for the most of the people in the Western world, we have so much abundance. There's so much available to us. And not to say that not everyone has equal access to it and everything, but that's an opportunity to shift a lot of that. And it all starts with ourselves. But one of the
yes.
other, sorry, go ahead.
No, I say
Yeah,
yes, I agree
yeah.
with you.
And the other thing is, when we talk about the fear, so we talked a little bit about the natural body fear that reacts when we're in danger and to protect us, and the fear of the dying process. We talked about also losing loved ones, whether we go and lose, or losing somebody, we're not physical with us anymore. And some of the things, and when we can look at it differently and realize we can actually start to connect with them, that helps us. The other thing is our existential beliefs. Do we exist beyond? And if this is all I am, who am I if I die? And if I'm just nothing, and so that is a very uncomfortable feeling for people, because I think it comes back to what you're saying. We actually did come down here as infinite beings, knowing that we're a unique expression of divine source, whatever, and that we do know inside of ourselves that we will continue. The thought that we actually are not significant, that we are not like everybody significant, not more than the other, but we are that expression. When we have to contemplate that we are not, I think that gives us this disconnect within us. I'm no longer, well, who am I? I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, but I think that's something that really resonates with people. It's like, what's going to happen after I die? Oh, I don't want to think about that, unless you have a belief system that says, yes, something does continue.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How about
And
with what? Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, and it depends, as I was saying, what your beliefs are,
Mm-hmm.
right? And um, there was something else I was going to go back to. I just wanted to talk more about also the what ifs and what's happening here, right? Because when we're in that fear state, like you said, that we don't know what's going to happen after we die. And it's human being is by nature, I think, uh, fearful of the unknown.
Mhm.
So we stay in a lot of situations and a lot of relationships and a lot of jobs, and because okay, this isn't ideal, but what's the unknown? And the big unknown is also what's the big unknown about when we die. But
Mhm.
it's like it's a slow death continuously in all those different situations of oh my god, the unknown. If I do lose my job, then what? If I lose my
Mhm.
house, then what? If I lose my husband, then what?
Mhm.
Right? So it's all like a death in a
Exactly.
sense.
Exactly.
And so in the what ifs, like you were saying, about the person thinking they might lose their job, and what if I do? What is physiologically happening here?
Mhm.
Right? So in those thoughts of my son, and oh my God, maybe he went off a cliff, and he's dead, and I'll never hear from him again, and what is happening here? So right away I start emitting these stress hormones of cortisol and adrenaline. Your heart starts beating fast, and your breath is like, you're breathing shallow, right? That shallow breath where sometimes you feel you can actually pass out.
Yes.
And so if that's happening, if we're living a life where we're constantly raising these stress hormones, what happens is all the other hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, DHEA, the anti-aging hormone, gets totally imbalanced.
Mhm.
And so and it's like we're living on the edge all the time, and we're living in non-reality. So when we live in that state, we're not here, we're
Mhm.
not present, we're not in the body. The body is always present. It's
Mhm.
always in the here and now. When we're in the here and now, in this moment, all of our hormones are balanced. We
Mm.
feel well, healthy, nourished, creating hormones that make us feel well, that keep our cells young, that keep us vibrant and alive, right? And the mitochondria, which are the powerhouses of our cell, do best when we are able to adapt to all the different situations in our life.
Mhm.
Right? So when we can catch ourselves in that moment of what if I am to die? What if that person dies? What if I'm to lose my job? And catch ourselves and go, wait a minute, I am now triggered. And triggered happens from our past,
Mhm.
right? Things that happened in the past. I'm no longer here, I'm now in my past. Triggered. Can I bring myself into this present moment and see what is real? What is real in this moment is you and I are sitting here having this conversation in front of a screen. That's what's real, period.
And other people listening later on.
Yes,
Exactly, right? Yeah.
yes,
And how
yes.
you're
So that's
reacting to
how
the
to,
conversation and how you're feeling about the conversation and listening to
yes,
that right now. Yeah.
yes. And so what the power comes in the awareness, bringing ourselves back to this moment, because even this conversation could be triggering,
Oh, yeah, for
right?
sure. For sure.
Very. And so it's coming into the moment and going, okay, every time I've gone down that rabbit hole of fear of the unknown and what's going to happen to me and my loved ones, and can I be in that? It's to bring ourselves back into the present moment. And that's the work. And, to come back into the moment. And your body and your breath, like I said, lives here. So that's the best way to get back, is to
Mhm.
use your breath to bring you back.
Mhm. Right. And it's
Conscious,
the lack
conscious breathing,
the conscious breathing. Yeah.
the conscious breathing,
I think that
not that of that's the fearful breathing, but the conscious breathing. And sometimes what helps me to get back is to put my hands in my belly and take some deep breaths and
mhm.
come back to this moment where I'm sitting in this chair having this conversation with you. And that's what's real.
Right. And then being the aware of the fear and as you said, where some of it comes from and observing it, and in some ways saying, okay, is that serving me at the greatest, kind of challenging it from that
Yeah.
perspective. Because we think about death, it makes us feel a lot out of control. Somebody else is going to die, so I'm going to die. Someone else is sick and may die. If we feel out of control, and what happens a lot of times when we feel out of control, instead of doing all the things that you just said, which is recognizing we can only control our thoughts and our minds and our reaction to things and be in the moment, we surpass that or try to push that down and go, okay, I can control it. I can find a way to control it. Let's go and make everything safe. We're in our little I was going to say bubble boy, you got bubbles all over, and you got your kids, so they doesn't, we've become parents who do that, the helicopter parents, making sure they're safe at all times, rather than recognizing they are divine beings. They have their own divine guidance. Yes, we're here to help them a bit, but not in complete control, because we are fearful of something happening, from small thing that their grades might go down to something more extreme, like getting ill or dying. And it's that, for me, what is really profound is I believe that we all actually have somewhat of a blueprint that we come in with, of things that we want to kind of experience. So, who we choose to, as parents, maybe the environment and religion and background that we have, to experience different things and to learn things from different perspectives. So if we were, a male in one life, we might come back as a female to experience the different. Or if we were Asian in one, we might come back as, I don't know, a native or something different in another lifetime. And so we have a bit of a blueprint. Not like everything we do is designed, and we have choice as we move through our life and decide, okay, I had this idea maybe back then, contract maybe with some other souls. Maybe I'm not quite there at this point, and I don't want to do that. And so we have choices to do that. And one of the things I learned when my husband died, and I learned to connect with him on the other side. And that's how I ended up writing my book, is through what you call automatic writing, where you connect through that, breath and connecting to him and just writing what comes through without editing. And I wrote a whole book about that way. And what he explained to me was that for he and I, we came on this planet, we'd had past lives together, but on this lifetime, we decided that the great awakening was coming soon, coming soon to a town near you, which, some people feel, or many people on the planet feel, is happening right now. And so this was just over 10 years ago. And he explained to me that our connection, when we came together before we were incarnated, we decided that one of us would possibly die as a catalyst for the other if we had not awakened in a near enough time to the Great Awakening. So if we had not waken up to the fact that we are spiritual beings, that we are much greater than the material that we're made of, and there's something much greater, if neither one of us had, then one of us would probably go the distance and leave the planet for the other. And then he explained that we decided that it would be me versus him, because of the fact, one, I was younger, two, I was a woman, and the Great Awakening, or the early risers in the Great Awakening, tend to be more women. So you see women gathering in groups and so forth right now. That's been happening for more than a decade. And I was actually starting to form spiritual groups and stuff at that time. And that also, for my, every death also has a ripple effect, not just on me, but everybody else that is connected to him. So it had a purpose for my boys as well, which I won't get into at this point, but there was a very specific, he explained to me, very specific for each one of them. And now, 11 years later, I see that purpose so clearly. I mean, he told me this and I had no idea at the time. And now I see it. It's like, it's as plain as day. That purpose that he had a very positive impact of his death on the kids, even though it was very, very difficult. And I think it's when we start to look at things that way, we start to see things from what we think is a three-dimensional reality, death and terrible and suffering, to the higher level, the fifth dimension reality, that there is this greater purpose, and it moves us towards greater awakening, love, in service, compassion, sovereignty, all the things that we're here to kind of express and help share and kind of help the planet evolve. And so that was really a great lesson for me to see that there was a purpose. There was a blueprint that we wanted to awaken. We wanted to help each other. And if we hadn't got there by a certain time, there was going to be some kind of mechanism. And that's the idea that at any time we have the opportunity to transcend, to move on to the next life, or stay. But we don't do it consciously. We don't go, oh, I don't want this disease to go away. But it's a subconscious, soul driven thing. And if we can start to recognize that, then we won't be blaming. My husband was the type of cancer he had was mesothelioma, which was related to asbestos. So I could have gone down that rabbit hole of it was all about asbestos. He was exposed, and how dare they? But I realized, oh, there was something greater at play. That was just the mechanism to how he died. It wasn't the reason he died. Mm-hmm. And so when I saw it, the 3D reality was the disease related to that and other emotional things. Won't get into now, but the higher view of it was that he played a role for all of his loved ones. And, anybody that's been touched by this story, really, he is part of his purpose of his dying as well. And, his being continues to exist and continues to have an impact on others and will continue again, just like all of us. We're all made the same way. So when someone asked me recently about, fear of death and COVID, I said, no, I don't fear it at all. And they said, well, that's because you don't have anyone close to you maybe that might die, because I've just had my young kids and my close friends that I'm seeing in my bubble-ish thing that we talk about. And I said, no, that's not it. It's really the experience I just explained with my husband of going through that I really, and then from there, I also was able to start to connect with my father. And then when my mother died 2 years after that, my experience of death with her, even though I was very close to her, was so different because of that realization and awakening and connection and knowledge that I had. And so I'm sharing this because I think if we can start to not fear death, we can live so differently. And I live with, and this conversation originally happened because somebody in our group said she was happy and someone asked her about it. She said she had lost her sister and went through a similar kind of journey that I did. And maybe you can share a little bit of your journey with your mom too, Sharon, but it was through that actually helped me lose my fear of death rather than the opposite, and to live much more fully now than I ever have. And even when I was 20 and wild and crazy, in some ways, I'm living more fully now and almost approaching 60. So, yeah. So
beautiful.
Thank you.
Beautiful. So yes, with my mother. So my mother was diagnosed with ovarian cancer when I was 25, she was 50. And I'm just listening to you, Leanne, and I'm even getting more about, the nuggets, the gifts that I got, from her passing and what I went through, even though it was so devastating. And the devastating thing for me was, well, wait a minute, like, you need to be here when I get married, and you need to be here when I have children. And, it was too much for me to bear. And for many, many different reasons, I blamed my father. Like you're saying, you could have blamed it on asbestos and you could have gone on to sue people or what have you. And people do that, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. There's no right or wrong here. There's just what perspective, are you looking at it from? Like, which, what consciousness? Fear is very small. It's very one focused. And if we can expand ourselves to the greater gifts, then we see the gifts. When we expand our consciousness, I call it the ego perspective, seeing it from, if we could look and see what has gone on here. And I realized that I'm not sure I would have made amends if my mother was still alive with my dad. And I was so angry and had not much of a relationship, certainly not a healthy one with him growing up. However, one day after my mom was gone, I was talking to someone and I said, oh my gosh, I'm an orphan. I have no parents. And it dawned on me that I had a father somewhere who I hadn't talked to in a long time. Right. And so when I realized that I could still connect with my mother, that she could still be there for me in some way, shape, or form. And I remember I was brushing my hair one day and I could, in my mind's eye, see her in the mirror. And I went, oh my God, she's still here for me. So she could still support me to get ready for my wedding and when my kids come. And that was a big aha moment. And I said, well, if that's true, then, I called upon her guidance to help me, maybe reconnect with a father that was too scary for me at the time, right? And so I kept getting these messages from wherever to go do this course, and in the course I had an aha moment, realizing I only saw from one perspective my father, from the perspective of my grandmother, my mother, from other perspective of other people. And as I sat in that course, I went, oh my gosh, I'm an adult now. What's my perspective? Maybe, and I don't even know this man. So maybe it's time to get to know him from adult to adult.
Mhm.
And a long story short, the healing had started with my dad, and the last 20 years has been a great love affair with my father. So that was one of the gifts of, my mother not being here, being so angry at him, thinking he was the cause, and realizing at some moment that, and I think my mother's spirit also helped me to realize that as well in some crazy way. Right. And so,
Yeah, and I think that the Joseph Campbell quote, something like, we have to give up the life we planned for the life that's waiting for us. And I think for you, that also meant, from what I understand the story, is also your whole career and
yes,
purpose in your life also stemmed from your mother's death as well. And similar for me,
100%.
that's
Yes.
this changed the way that I was working and the type of work that I did dramatically. And so, if we can start to open up to this on everything,
Yes.
that's where it's that kind of 3D versus 5D view. And I heard this description, because people will say, well, okay, that's for maybe your life, but what about these big tragedies, these big horrible things that have happened on the planet? Can we all look at it from those two perspectives? And I heard the description of the Holocaust and World War II in particular, and all that happened there from the 3D was just, an unbelievable, horrific time, one of the worst times in history. Same with what happened with Stalin and millions of people killed and so forth. And then what I heard from a 5D perspective was that this, this was kind of the almost what, about 80 years ago now, that we were, as humanity was coming up to the time of ascension, that the vibration of the planet was so low. When you think about the control structures and the monarchies in Europe and so forth, that they're needed, and in order to be able to raise the vibration enough to be able to catch on to the ascension process that's happening right now, there had to be this massive cataclysm, this massive thing that happened on the planet, in order to raise a vibration. You think, well, how did that raise a vibration? But if you think about what happened afterwards, humanity came in together, and so much of, let's say, what the evil that was seen, the opposite gets reflected. The seeing of one Aryan race or whatever then makes us realize how biased and racist the planet is, and how there was a need for human rights and equality. And the UN was formed, and different things that were created. The rights movement and stuff that came after that brought people together in love as a result of something that was, really demonstrating the opposite of love. And you can look at every different thing from that different perspective of what resulted after that. And yet when we're in it as a 3D beings, we can't usually see that, and we can't accept it. And we, and so I think that when we start to see and same what's happening with COVID over the year, it'll only be maybe decades or hundreds of years from now where we really see what did that really do for humanity? Each one of us can see on our own life. I don't think I've spoken to one person in the last year that hasn't said, yeah, I've benefited this, or this has happened that's a positive for me. We do that individually, but what also on a collective basis is happening that we can't quite see right now. We kind of can believe it and have trust in it, but we can't always have that fifth dimensional view until afterwards, until history has kind of gone through.
Yes. Yes. Beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think part of what we're going through now is very much to wake up to our own sovereignty, and because I think a lot of people have been waiting for our savior,
Yes.
whatever that is in your mind space, and to ultimately get that we are it. We are it. And so if we are it, then what? Who are we going to be? And as we know, like in the 60s, we woke up to we are creator beings. We started to really get, even though we have been forever, we started to really get that we are, we create with our thoughts, right? And so what are we creating each day with our thoughts, in our thought process? And and to understand, if we are creator beings, then as a collective, we have created this COVID, this what we call COVID, this last year that we have lived somehow, and not like you were talking about before, maybe not consciously, unconsciously, as souls manifest here on this time. And I believe that the souls that are manifest here on this time were like, okay, me, I want to be here. I want to sign up to be manifest here on this planet, on planet Earth at this time, to support this transition that we are going through, right? To bring more light, to bring more love. I think we're also moving very much into the heart as a collective. And moving from here, the intellect, more into our heart. And I think that however, now we're seeing the duality. And it is so, there's always been duality when we manifest here on Earth. Duality began, the right, the wrong, the good, the bad, the black, the white. And now we really see it. It's exacerbated, right? Are you on this team or this team? Are you, a Trumper or a Biden? Are you a right? Are you a masker or an anti-masker? Are you getting a vaccine or you're, what do they call it? It's like you're a anti-vaccinator or whatever. Right?
So true. Yes. And
it
brings up
that comes together, that is being shown, but it's almost like, it feels almost like we're taking our side, but it feels almost like the whole thing, to me energetically, because I'm sensitive to energy, that the whole thing is just going to cave all in. Right? That It's just like we hold our side, we hold strong to it, and it's just like, it just feels like it's just gonna burst into one big thing, and we're really gonna get shortly that we're all in this boat together, and we really have a similar intention.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. And if we think about, I agree. I feel that there's so much what we're experiencing now is the teaching of love and respect and acceptance, all towards our real sovereignty as souls in this body. And again, if we look at we'll look at something like what happened in the Second World War, what was really so obvious and so horrific was that the belief that there were certain human beings that were better or more superior. Like that's what really was one of the biggest things that came out of the Second World War, right? Was that was being exposed. And so when that was being exposed, then the allowed it to really, like we talked about before, the pimple to burst, like you're saying, and the boil to burst, and the ooze out and have to be cleaned out. And we're still,
Yeah.
dealing with that around the whole world. But it really did expose that. So is it possible, similar, the divisiveness is being exposed to such a great extent? It's the bubble, it's the boil that we're dealing with now, that when it's really only through acceptance, that's, busting it, seeing it, busting it, the pus, which is what it does to us as society, how it hurts us in such a great way, just like bigotry and racism and stuff like that does. And when we see the divisiveness and how it hurts us so much, and it's being exposed to such a great level right now, then that allows us to see how to overcome that, not to think as one, but to have various perspectives and accepting of the other. And this comes back to fear again, because why will I not accept another's perspective? Because I fear that I believe that you have an influence, the external world, controls what I do, say, think, feel, how long I live, everything, as opposed to, this comes back to sovereignty. I am completely responsible for everything that shows up in my life, everything. And I have control of my thoughts and reactions to that. And so when I can start to believe that, I let go of the need to control a situation, a person, a government, anything. And I can get more into acceptance. And that's where the real sovereignty is. Because when you can be locked in your home and have a curfew, and people say you can't go here or there without this, that, and the other thing, and feel constricted and feel my sovereignty is taken away. But when you come from that point of, I don't need the government, anyone else, to make me happy, to feel divine love, to connect with spirit, to do my work, to whatever it might be, I'm creating, as you were saying, from my thoughts, from my emotions, then I have such way more freedom than the days when I could run around and do anything and didn't realize that about myself, and thought that it was everything else that was giving me this freedom. And so it all comes down back to, what we're going on through here is, kind of overcoming the fear, recognizing the illusion of the fear, and then connecting it back to our own self-responsibility, that everything we create is part of our thoughts and our emotions, and we have the ability to adjust that, even in the middle of lockdown, even in the middle of a Holocaust. We've seen so many experiences of that in the past, and even in the worst jail situations. That's where our greatest lesson is. And sitting beside someone who dying, who you love so dearly, those are some of the moments that you can have the greatest level of acceptance, surrender, love, serenity, compassion, sovereignty. And that's, so it's that duality of the dark and the light, so to speak, is what we need to create the fabric of this matrix, right? But at the same time, we shun it. The dark shouldn't exist, and only the light. But we need both of that. And that's what we're seeing in such great drama unfolding in front of us now.
Beautiful. And isn't that the yin and the yang is made
Yes.
up of the dark and the light?
Yes,
Dark and
exactly.
the light, right?
Yeah. And so maybe we can just finish off with a little bit around, how that leads to, with, this illusion of that the dark is bad, and the external world I have to control it to some extent in order to make me peaceful and happy and so forth. Doesn't that lead to the other discussion that we had around about self-care? Because when we're always out there having to please everyone, heal everyone, stop everyone from doing this, keep everyone safe, we don't have much energy left for us, the being that we came to be and experience, right?
Yes.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that idea of selfishness versus self-care and self-responsibility?
Yes. So a lot of us, I'll speak for myself, have been brought up to be caretakers of others, especially women. I think we have been brought up to be, but there's a part of it that's innate, that we are caretakers. We're innately caretakers, and we're usually better at it than men are. And that's great. And we're the nurturers and we're the child bearers and all that. And, but I think sometimes, like in my culture, where I come from, I was brought up with a lot of secrets, a lot of secrets, and a lot of things that I was told to like keep in the family, kind of to save face. You know, we don't want to look bad. And we take care of each other and make sure, you know, my grandmother was like, you know, you put your husband first and your children first, and you take care of everybody and make sure everybody has what they need. And then if there's leftover, you take care of you. And that's not what I was told necessarily, but that's what I saw.
Mhm.
And that was my perception growing up. And I saw that my mother was living in a very unhappy marriage and many times wanted to leave, but my grandmother was like, no, 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 and he's going to change, and you know, you need to stay. And I'm sure it was, she was afraid out of fear, like maybe my mother would be ostracized from the community because who got divorced back then, and you know, that whole story, and what will the neighbors think, and we have to fit in, because if you fit in, then you know you're safe, and if you're safe, that's very good, that's very good, you will, you know, you will live a good life. And if you're not safe, we don't know what not safe is, right? But the fact that I don't know it, it might be very bad for you. So I was taught like what's safe and what's not and how to veer that, right? And so when I was about 20 years ago, I was the caretaker of everybody, of my husband and my two little children and my grandma, because my grandfather had died. And she was my caretaker. So I said, I must be her caretaker at the expense of myself. I ran myself ragged. I was running a business and everything else, and ended up in the hospital for 5 days, diagnosed with Crohn's disease, which was interesting because as I started to understand parts of the body and what it meant, I was saying, what couldn't I digest then? And I couldn't digest that, you know, I was always focused on everything and everybody. And I was by the string of my pants, you know, how do you say that? But like,
I don't know
it
the
was,
term, but yeah, I know what you mean. Yes.
yeah. So there was almost like, I was exhausted. I was exhausted. And I didn't know how to get out of this because this is how I was trained, right? So here I was 5 days in the hospital bed, which was a lot of days to think about, if I keep going in this pattern, I might be dead soon.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then I can't be there not only for me, but for everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, it was a lot of reflection time and realizing that doesn't work and I have to make changes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to make changes of deep, I had to start reflecting on my deep patterns. Like, what are they? What were they? What were the things I told? And do they really resonate with me as a woman, as an adult now?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And start to create my own in sovereignty, as you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
My what works for me, take back myself and start asking, because I don't even realize, I don't think all of us realize until we do, that we're programmed, until we can step outside of that and start watching the program.
Mm-hmm.
Then once we can have the awareness of the program and the tapes that run continuously, can we look at it and say, oh, does that really work for me?
Exactly.
And so when I came out of that and out of the hospital, I started to make changes and realize that I need to start taking, and I am worthy. And that brought up something else for me, because it's whole thing like, what do we base self-love and self-care on? You know, if I do enough, if I'm kind enough, if I run myself ragged for everybody else, like, what do you base your self-worth on? And I started to get an inkling of maybe it's based on nothing more than just to be a being here, manifest on earth. I am already worthy to love and take care of myself.
Mm.
What would look, and I started to look at life like that, and everything changed. Because when you change your beliefs and perceptions, the whole world looks different. Nobody else changed. This changed.
It's so dramatic, eh? It's so amazing. And
So
one of
amazing.
the ladies on the,
That disease,
yeah,
right? So sometimes we look at disease and go, this is so awful. I have cancer. I have this. I have that. But that could be your greatest gift. And I feel it's your soul telling you, you have outgrown your beliefs, thoughts, patterns, emotions, and there's something else. Your soul's calling you. Wake up to the next level of your consciousness. Wake up and start asking questions. And I think that's where we're at now as a universe in this COVID. It's like our systems are not working. Wake up and start questioning
yeah.
all of our systems that aren't working.
Yes, 100%. And it's the same with losing a loved one. Exactly what you described as a disease to wake us up of what we've
I did.
outgrown. Disease is out of alignment, right? And it's the same with death of a loved one. It's the same, it has the same mechanism, the same catalyst for us to awaken to that. And it comes back to that one of the ladies that was talking yesterday about self-care. She says she knows it all, she understands it all, she knows the techniques and everything, but it takes self-love in order to give yourself the permission to do the things that so like saying no, it might be setting up boundaries. There's so many different ways, and we're not going to get all the techniques of self-care, but just it starts with that, as you're saying, the awareness that we are worthy. And so that self-love to allow that. And there was a psychologist, I think, or psychologist on the call too, and she described there was two main needs that when we're born. One is attachment, so that the person, we attach to our mother and so forth, so we can get fed, and it's a survival instinct. And the second one, which we don't hear about as much, is the permission to be ourselves authentically. And often we trade that second one because of the need for the first one. So we may feel that if we're not completely ourselves, we will lose the love or care of the ones that really are there to look after us. And that just continues into, as you said before, school, or in teenage, our little groups and our families, and it goes on and on. And so that we lose completely who we authentically were, always in the need for that attachment, the survival instinct. And we're at the stage in our evolution that we are beyond the survival. It's not that it doesn't exist, but we can, to have a more existential perspective of why we're here and how we can express ourselves. We have to really be rooted and grounded in the trust of the survival, and that who we are matters, and that putting ourselves first isn't selfish. It's actually a great selfless act for the people in our lives. And and that when we can start to do that and start to recognize the fears that are holding us back, and that can be causing disease and the different things in our life, bankruptcy, whatever it might be in our life, that we actually have the capability to get into an observer awareness, see it, watch the triggers, have other people help us, coach us, whatever, to see it that we can't see for ourselves, to make that shift in perspective, which is what Sharon was saying, is completely changes everything in your external life, even though they don't really change. It just changes because of your perspective.
Yes, and I want to add, it's beautiful what you're saying, and it's a scary thing, Leanne, because I work with a lot of middle-aged women, right? And so imagine you're going through life this way, right? And we train people how to be with us, our family, our friends, our parents, and then all of a sudden we go, you know what? No, I'm not doing that anymore, right? I always said yes to you when you asked me this, but I'm not doing that. And it's like disconcerting to people. It's like, well, what do you mean? You always do that. You always say yes when I ask you this,
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, yeah, but you know what? Now I see from a different place and I'm checking in with myself, and that really doesn't work with me. So, no. And so we have to be willing to stand up to maybe some friction, people getting pissed at us because it's like, well, come on, because in some ways people don't want us to change
Mhm. Mhm.
because they're comfortable with the known. They're comfortable. It's like, well, my mother always reacts like this, or my wife, she'll say yes to this, or whatever it shall be, right? Or my boss. He has
Mhm.
these expectations because I always do it. And then I'm going, you know what? No, that doesn't feel right. Well, what do you mean? No, you're questioning that. So
Mhm.
we have to also be ready and willing to stand up to whatever and realize that we are responsible for what we bring to the table and they're responsible for what they bring to the table, right? And
Mhm.
then that's when communication, and somebody yesterday on our call brought in, that's when communication is really important, and
Mhm.
trusting ourselves. Do you trust yourself that if you bring something and the other person, it starts a kerfluffle, do you trust yourself that you could work it out in
Mhm.
communication? And the only way to do that is to stay present, because the moment that we go back into our triggers is the moment that we're not here present and standing in our authentic self and truth.
Mhm.
And it's so easy to do that. A lot of people say, oh my God, the moment I'm with my parents and I get triggered, it brings me back to I'm 5 years old again.
Mhm. Mhm. And maybe we're coming a little bit at the end of our time here, but just finish off with the idea of communication, because you're right, that woman brought up a great perspective, and then the conversation went around how often we don't ask for what we need, right? And this whole idea of being able to communicate our needs. And women, I think men do it so much better than us. They're like, no, I don't want that, and they put up their boundaries and they're clear. And women are like, oh no, and then they kind of go around and then they say, you can believe what that person did, da, 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 da. They don't
We defend
actually.
ourselves, right?
Yeah,
And we like, and we try to justify why we said that thing, and we scramble.
exactly. And then, as opposed to, can we just be able to say, this doesn't work for me right now? And the idea that no is a complete
No,
sentence.
it's a complete set. Yeah. And,
Right.
and yes. And I love that, because what really changed in my relationship with my husband is, and you're right about men, like if he's like, no, and I'm not going to do that now. And that's the end of it. And I realized when I asked for something, I was like, well, I would like this, and then I'd like this. And that doesn't really work for me when you do this. And then I give him a whole 10-minute lecture, and I realized he checked out.
Yeah.
He's not even there. And then I said, wow, what if I just asked for what I needed in one sentence and left the room? Like,
Mhm.
just left it hanging. And it was like so profound what started to happen. I
Mhm.
just said, I really need, when you need something from me, it works much better if you ask me in a calm way or whatever. And then I would just leave. And I
Mhm.
would say it very neutral and just leave it there in the space. And
Mhm.
then so many times he'd come back and say, I really thought about what you said.
Mhm.
And I could do that. And it was like, wow.
And that comes back to what you're saying before, is teaching people how to react with us and how to interact with us. We teach them all the time by how we react and what we say, and when we can communicate on a better level, with more awareness, more consciousness, and compassion for where the other one's coming from, it helps dramatically, and will move us more into out of the kind of survival mindset, and into more of that, the trust that comes from being more in your heart, and what peace that comes with that, and
Yeah.
the knowing that we are responsible for what happens outside of us. And so, and that we are part of divine, and divinity is everlasting. So I don't know if you have anything else that you wanted to add at this point, but we really appreciate, if you've listened to this whole thing, that's awesome. Maybe if you turned it off and turned it back on, we hope that some of this information has been helpful, and maybe you'd be interested in sharing. And we'll have the links how to connect with Sharon and myself below. And if you're interested in attending any of our women's circles, we're now doing it once a month on the second Friday, be at 4 o'clock Eastern time. It goes for an hour and a half. And we have these great juicy conversations. And there's always something that each one of us, including, Sharon and I, very much get out of it and learn and grow from. So,
Yes.
yeah.
And I'm so thankful for everybody who joined us. I'm thankful to Leanne for being a partner in really keeping these conversations open. And I invite you to chunk it out for yourself. Keep the when we get the answers, it stops us from seeking. So I invite you to stay in the questions and have these conversations maybe with other people or other groups. And and if you feel that you would like to come and join us, it would be a joy and a pleasure. We're always open. Bring your friends and other people who are seekers like we are.
Yeah, great. And it's free too. So you really don't have much to put in front
To
of you as a
lose.
barrier, right? Much to lose. Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
have a wonderful day, everyone. Thanks again for listening. Thank you so much, Sharon, for your light and your wisdom and your experience. So thank you all so much. Have a wonderful day. Namaste. Love.